Hello and welcome to the October Crane Research Forum. Thank you for joining us here today. We're very glad to have you. My name is Rebecca Dorr and I'm the Director of Research here at the Crane Center for Early Childhood Research and Policy. My colleagues Delaney and Kathy will be monitoring our chat box today and adding our housekeeping items over there. These monthly forums feature research on emerging or key topics that impact the field of early childcare and education. And today I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Xin Feng. Dr. Feng is a professor in the Department of Human Sciences at OSU and a faculty affiliate here at the Crane Center. Her research looks at the interplay between constructs like temperament, emotion regulation, and parent-child interactions. She examines how contextual factors like parental mental health and family culture impact child development, including both adaptive and maladaptive social-emotional functioning. She has several ongoing research projects that investigate emotional and cognitive regulation in preschool-age children of depressed and non-depressed mothers. She's also particularly interested in examining the intricate relations between cognitive and emotion regulation and the role they play in development of early emotional and behavioral problems. Dr. Feng is here with us today to speak on the contribution of fathers in emotion socialization. With that, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rebecca, for introduction, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So as Rebecca introduced, today I'm going to talk about the contribution of fathers in the emotion socialization of young children. Just a quick overview. So I'm going to talk a little bit, give you some background about emotion socialization during early childhood and the role of fathers and the mothers in the emotion socialization process. And the majority of this talk will focus on a study that is done in my lab about looking at the unique role of the fathers in children's emotion socialization. This paper was written by a former PhD student, Micah Gerhardt. And then to conclude, I'm going to talk a little bit about implications and future directions. Okay, what is emotion socialization? Just put it in a simple term, it is a process by which children learn to understand, express, and regulate emotions in social context, in particular in interpersonal relationship context. So this process, you could look at it in two ways. It is the process in which children learn how to obtain those skills. And in the meantime, the interpersonal relationships also shape the ways children can learn and what is exposed to them and how they learn. So emotion socialization is bi-directional process, although I think most of the studies you can read out there focus more on the parental influence or the parental role in this process. It's the same as the study that I'm going to present today. Early childhood is a particularly sensitive developmental period for emotion socialization because this is the time when children gradually gain ability to self-regulate their own emotions, to understand the emotions of themselves, of their own and of others. So that will enable them to have the ability to appropriately interact with others in social situations. So in this period, it's particularly important for the emotion socialization to make sure that they develop competence in those areas. And also during early childhood, parents, home is the primary environment where they are socialized, and parents are typically the primary socialization agents. In terms of the role of parents in emotion socialization, there are a couple of theoretical frameworks that have been proposed to account for the pathways through which parents can exert influence in those during this process. So there are three major pathways. One is observation or modeling. That means that children can learn from their observation of their parents' expression of emotion and their parents' ways of dealing with emotions. So there's a term called emotion contagion, which basically means that children can catch the emotion expression of the parents or of the others. And children will also use social referencing in situations that they're not sure about. So they will look at other people, could be parents or peers, in trying to understand how to interpret the situation and how to regulate. Children, of course, also can model the ways in which parents regulate their emotions. For example, numerous studies have shown that children of depressed parents, they tend to have issues with emotion regulation, partially because that the depressed parents themselves, they tend to have difficulties in regulating their emotions, so that they, in a way that they model some of the ineffective ways of emotion regulation. And parents can also influence children's emotion socialization process through emotion-related parenting practices. So for instance, this is more of a direct effect. So parents can influence children by their reactions to children's emotions. So when children cry, parents can have different reactions. You know, some parents might immediately soothe the child. Some might try to reason with the child, and some might ignore what the child does. So those different reactions would likely to have an impact on children's ability to regulate emotion. And also parents can use different strategies, different ways to teach, to approve, and or to help children understand their emotions. This is referred to as emotion coaching. We're going to go into more about this concept later in this talk. Parents can also influence children by providing emotional climate of the family. This refers to family expressivity. It could include the intensity or frequency of emotion expression, and also parent-child relationships such as attachment relationships, or parenting style. Basically, what's the, how warm the parents are, and how supportive they are, which set the tone of the interpersonal relationship. And this also includes parental relationships or marital relationships between the parents. So these, there are substantial empirical evidence that support these pathways in parents' influences, but most of the evidence, empirical evidence, come from study of mothers or mother emotion socialization. There's very limited understanding of what father's role is in emotion socialization. However, there has been growing body of literature looking at father's role in general child development or in larger, broader social emotional development. So earlier research on fathers have shown that there is definitely a difference between the quantity of involvement. So the sheer amount of time that fathers involved tends to be less than the mothers. It's still true. For instance, one of the studies in which that I collaborated with my colleagues, so they looked at the diary data and asked the mothers and fathers of dual earner families to report how much time they engage with their infants. So at different age, during different age points, and that data clearly show that mothers spend more time than fathers engaging with their infants. Studies also have shown that contexts in which fathers are involved with children are also different from mothers. Fathers are more likely to engage with children in play, whereas mothers are more likely to be engaged with children in the caregiving context than fathers. And recently, there's been a new theory developed that explain fathers, kind of the difference in fathers' interaction with the children, and a new concept which is called activation relationship with children. So fathers, characterize the difference between father's involvement with children and mother's involvement. When we talk about, when we think of attachment relationships, we all understand that the sensitivity of the parents in response to children's cues, that comfort-seeking cues during distress is important for development of secure attachment. It is also, according to Paquette and the colleagues, it is also important for the encouragement in the exploration when children in stressful or strange or unfamiliar situations or in distress situations. So fathers tends to do more activation, like provide more encouragement in the exploration of children. They also would provide more challenge or expose children to more challenging situations than mothers do. So according to these researchers, and this activation relationship would likely to promote children's social emotional development. The question still remains, that is whether fathers play a unique role in child development, or whether the fathers and mothers' role are indistinguishable. The empirical studies, evidence from empirical studies is mixed. Some studies show that As long as one parent that does a good job, then the child is okay. And some studies show that fathers do play a unique role in addition to what the effect of mother's socialization. So for instance, there's a meta-analysis recently which showed that fathers will make a unique effect on predicting children's social emotional outcomes. So we set out then to study whether this is true, or the meta-analysis is about the general parenting or general child development, but we were more interested in looking at whether fathers also play a unique role in the emotion socialization processes. This is the study. It's called A Naturalistic Study of Parental Emotion Socialization, Unique Contribution of Fathers. It was published in 2020 in the Journal of Family Psychology. The aims of the study are examine the contribution of fathers and mothers' emotion socialization in predicting children's emotion expression. We focus specifically on children's emotion expression as an indicator of how well they regulate their emotions. And we also study mothers and fathers simultaneously. This would allow us to be able to test whether mothers and fathers they each plays unique role in this process. So while controlling for mothers, we're able to tell whether fathers might contribute to this process over and above what the mothers do. By emotion socialization process, we focused on two aspects. One is parents' emotion expression in everyday life, and parents' emotion coaching. Parents' emotion expression in their everyday life provides direct or indirect impact on modeling, and so it models, so it provides direct or indirect impact on children's socialization of emotion. It connected to the two of the three pathways that we discussed earlier. It related to modeling and family emotional climate. So the ways in which mothers and fathers express their emotions, it's first, children will be able to observe during their daily lives and could model their behavior, and their expressivity in terms of the overall intensity and the frequency of their expression also set up a family emotional climate for the children. Studies have shown that fathers and mothers' modeling of emotion expression may have differential effects on children's expressions, partially due to the fact that mothers and fathers, their clarity of expression tends to be different. Mothers, there are a small number of studies shown that mother's expression tend to be clearer than fathers, and there often is some ambiguity in father's expression. This somehow makes it more challenging for children to interpret, and also help them learn, provide a wider range of emotional cues for them to learn to interpret. And studies have shown that while in some studies that mother's expression clarity is not related to children's understanding of emotion, but father's expression is. The second part of aspect of emotion socialization, we focus on both mothers and fathers' emotion coaching. Emotion coaching was originally proposed, this concept was proposed by Gottman and colleagues, and in the context of studying parents' meta-emotion philosophy. Their study has shown that parents who holds a emotion coaching philosophy, which means that so parents think that negative emotions are okay to express, and it's normal for children to feel negative emotions or express negative emotions. And they also use that as an opportunity to help children understand emotions and to help them learn how to problem solve in those situations. And parents with emotion coaching philosophy tends to have children who are better to children who have better ability to regulate emotions and also show higher levels of social and emotional competence. And later studies looking at parent-child conversations about emotion, and also looked at some parental practices in terms of the labeling of child emotion during conversation, approval and acceptance of children's emotion, mostly negative emotions, and the reasoning with children about their emotions, meaning that to help children understand, what the cause and consequences of emotions, and also, providing a guidance or suggestions on the emotion regulation strategies, or parents when use any or all of those strategies tends to have children who are better able to regulate their emotions. In this study, we included naturalistic observation. We collected part of the data from the participant homes. Most of the studies so far with young children, either on emotion socialization or emotion regulation, either rely on heavily on parental report or on laboratory observations. Laboratory observations is useful in gathering information about children's behavior in response to certain emotion situations in a controlled context, but we really know very little about how parents' emotion expression and how children express and regulate their emotions in their everyday lives. So with new technology, we're able to do audio recording. It's relatively unobtrusive method, and it can provide ecologically valid measures of parental emotion socialization, and which will enable us to understand whether father understand the differential role of fathers and mothers in the emotion socialization process. I'm going to talk more about this naturalistic observational method later in the method section. So we have two hypotheses based on the studies that I just discussed earlier. We hypothesized that higher levels of father positive expressions and emotion coaching would be associated with higher levels of concurrent child positive expression and lower levels of negative expression in the home settings. So that is concurrent, and that occurred at the same time. And we also hypothesized that higher levels of father's positive expression and emotion coaching would predict higher levels of child positive expression and lower levels of child negative expression in the lab setting 1 year later. Participants of this study were drawn from a larger study that focused on maternal depression, depressive symptoms, and children's emotion regulation. So in this study, both mothers and fathers within each family and their preschool age children participated. This is a small sample with 69 families that has both parents participated. Children were between 3 and 4 when they enrolled in the study, which is the first time point. This study, the parents, majority of the parents were married, 88%, and a majority of the children lived with their biological father. So that means that their mother were still married with their biological father. The family income to needs ratio is 2.85 on average. That means that their income, family income, is about 3 times of the federal poverty level. And 51% of the fathers and 78% of mothers had at least a college degree. So this sample is skewed towards the more highly educated mothers. And majority of the mothers, 75% were white, 20% were Black or African American, and about 6% Hispanic or Latino, and about 3% were American Indian or Alaskan Native. So this is a longitudinal study with 2 time points. At time 1, we did the audio recording at home. We asked the mothers to choose a typical day, a typical weekend day. So it occurs on weekend. A typical day means that it's just like the most of their weekend days. There was no special outing, no special visitors, things like that. And we set the device, we use the device as you can see in that picture. It's a iPod Touch, and there is a special software that could set it, program it to record a certain, turn on and off at certain times. So we chose to let it record 1 minute of the ambient sound of the child, and then for every 10 minutes. So that means that it turns on for a minute, and then it turns out off for 10 minutes. The reason that this was done is that first is it will be less intrusive. So you don't record the everything during the day. So the mothers tend to feel more comfortable allowing us to do that. And also, it's automatically programmed. Children and the parents, they don't know exactly when the recording, the recorder turns on and when it turns off. So it would be less biased. And also, this allows us to sample the environment evenly across the day during which the child is awake. So we will not, so that there is no bias towards, in terms of the sampling, towards any specific portion of the day. We also ask the mother to take notes on children's activities every half an hour, so it'll provide context for us to understand what we could hear from the audio recording. By ambient sound, I mean just an environmental sound around the child. It can be the child's own speech. It can be the background speech if the television is on, or if people are talking in the background. And it also captures quite a bit of child's conversation with the mothers, fathers, or other people in the house. At time one, mothers also provide some report, self-report and report about the children. And at the second time point, which is about 1 year later, when children were between 5 and 6, we bring the mothers and children to the lab for so they will go, they were administered to some emotion eliciting tasks, one of which is called the cleanup, in which we ask the mother to ask the child to clean up toys that the child was playing with. This is a 5-minute task, and children tend, this is meant to be mild to moderately stressful to children, because most children do not want to stop playing and putting their toys away. So we are able to observe both positive and negative emotions of the child during this task. So for home observation, we coded father-mother's positive expression, which include laughing, singing happily, excited or excited tone in voice. Well, so because it's audio recording, so we'll have to rely on most of the information and the voice information. We also coded for father-mother emotion coaching, which include labeling, accepting, validating children's emotion, teaching emotional skills, and reasoning about children's emotion. And for child, we also coded for children's positive and negative expression, which the positive are for coding of positive emotion, it's exactly the same as father's and mother positive expression. And for negative, we coded crying, whining, yelling with an angry tone, and sighing. So we're using a coding manual developed by Slatcher and Tobin. We did some modification with that. For maternal report, mothers reported their depressive symptoms on CESD. We included this because we oversampled on mothers who showed elevated depressive symptoms for the larger study. And we also obtained mothers' report on emotional reactivity of the children using CBCL as a control variable. For lab observation, we coded for children's positive and negative emotion expressions. With the video coding, we are able to we have more information for the coding. So we'll look at facial expression, tone of voice, gesture, and statement for coding both positive and negative. For mothers, we only coded for positive expression. So for concurrent association, which is fathers and children's expressions during home at time 1, we did hierarchical regression. So we did the regression in 3 steps. We initially put child gender and emotional reactivity as the control at the first step. And then we add maternal variables, including mother's positive expression, mother's coaching, and mother's depressive symptoms at the second level. At the second step and the last step, we added father's coaching or father's positive expression. So because we have a fairly small sample, we have to make choices of in terms of which variables we can include in each model, because we're limited in terms of how many independent variables we can include. So the decision we made was that we need both mothers and fathers variables in the same sample, so we can test fathers, the effect of fathers with the mother's variables controlled. So because of that, we included father's coaching and father's positive in different models. As you can see, that child gender is negatively associated with child positive positivity. That means that boys show less positive expression, and they're also marginally showed more negative expression. That is consistent with literature. And in addition, mother's positivity does show a marginal positive association with child positive expression, and father coaching shows a positive association with child positive. So fathers who did more coaching tends to have children who also show more positive expression. The model with father's positive expression as the predictor. So as you can see in this table, father's positive expression also was positively associated with child positive expression, but not negative expression. Lastly, we use mothers and fathers expression and coaching at home to predict children's expression in the lab situation in the cleanup task a year later. And in this analysis, we controlled one more variable, which is child positive expression during time 1 in the lab. So this is expected that their positive expression in the lab at different time points tends to be strongly correlated. And then child emotional reactivity also is negatively related to positivity, which is expected. And finally, father's coaching at T1 is positively related to child positive in the lab. We also ran the analysis for father's positive expression, but in that is not significantly related. So overall, our data did show that the fathers, there's a unique contribution of fathers' emotion socialization over and above mother's socialization, emotion socialization behavior. Specifically, both fathers' positive expression and coaching were associated with child positive expression at home, and fathers' emotion coaching at home were predictive of child positive expression in the lab. So this second finding provides some kind of robust support for, because that's parents, fathers, and children are observed in different situations and they're 1 year apart. And unlike what we expected, we didn't find any association between maternal expression of coaching and children's emotion expression, which is somewhat consistent with several previous studies showing that fathers tend to have fathers' emotion socialization behavior tends to have stronger relation with child outcomes, which is also consistent with Paquette and colleagues' proposal on the activation relationship between fathers and child. The study has several limitations. So as I said earlier, it's a fairly small sample, and the sample is biased towards more highly educated mothers and mothers with elevated depressive symptoms. And because of that, we also have limitations in analysis. And the sampling bias also is related to we have only 1 day. So that day may or may not be representative of the child daily life. In future studies, it will be helpful if we could have several days in both weekdays and weekend days. And also for the lab situation, we only looked at one particular task. So with more it will be helpful to observe children and parenting a range of different emotionally listing tasks, which would provide a more comprehensive picture of how they interact. But in our study, the children are observed in both naturalistic and home settings and controlled lab settings, so that will help corroborate our finding, provide some consistency in that support the finding across different situations. So some of the implications and future directions. Although this is a still exploratory, I think this study still has a exploratory nature, and the findings needs to be corroborated in future studies. There is some evidence in the research that's suggesting that when we look at children's emotion regulation, emotion socialization, we need to consider both mothers and fathers in research and also in practice. For instance, in practices in school or in interventions. In this study, we only looked at the additive relation, the kind of additive effect of fathers and mothers. We did not have power to look at the interaction between father and mother's emotion socialization. I mean, I think an interesting direction would be to look at whether fathers' socialization behavior moderate the maternal influences. This might be particularly important to look at when we study children in disadvantaged family environment or in a context of a negative maternal influence, to look at whether father's role actually provide buffering for those negative impacts. And lastly, there's some research showing that fathers and mothers might interact differently with boys versus girls. So it will be interesting to look at the differential relationships between gender of parents and gender of children in emotional socialization. This is important because we know that in many societies, our socialization of children, particularly in relation to emotion socialization, is fairly gendered. So to get a full understanding of how the emotion socialization goes, we'll need to look at the gender of both parents and children. Well, that concludes my presentations, and thank you for coming to this webinar again. And if you have questions, I believe we have some time for questions, and you could also email me at this email address if you have any further questions that I can that I didn't have a chance to answer today.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful talk. Please, participants, if you do have questions for Dr. Feng, please go ahead and stick them in the question and answer box, and I will pass those along. The question that's in there that I wanted to start with is from Margaret Jenkins, who asks, when you reference mothers, do you mean females and fathers as males? And I'll add to that sort of more broadly. I was wondering if you could talk about how these sort of links or associations might play out in families with LGBTQ parents.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I know that because my research focused primarily on mothers, I just just a few years ago, I started to get into a little bit in researching fathers. I'm that's the relationships, parent-child relationships in LGBTQ families is not I don't have expertise in that. So yes, when I say mothers, I refer to females, and when I say fathers, I refer to males. I know that this terminology might need to be changed in light of the new developments in the family, like there's a wider range of different family composition. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you.
Thanks. The other question I had, and it may be because we were just speaking before we started today about your class coming up on child development and culture, is if you could speak to whether there's any research on how these links may play out differently in different cultural settings.
Yes, there are studies looking at differences in emotion socialization. Again, that study is not, tends to be more likely to be small scaled. And so we still have kind of a limited understanding in terms of, where the difference is. And it also depends on what cultures you're talking about, whether it is, different ethnic groups or within the U.S. or different across different cultures. There's more study provide contrast between Eastern and Western cultures, or like looking at the differences between individualistic cultures versus so cultures that's emphasis more on the individualistic cultures versus the cultures that emphasis more on conformity. If you're interested in the cultural differences, I think it would be difficult to summarize, provide a few simple summary of where the cultural differences are. It's varied depending on which culture you are studying. There is a very interesting paper that I always use in my class, which was published a while ago by Pamela Ko, who is at Penn State. It's a very interesting study looking at cultural differences in emotional socialization in different ethnic groups in Nepal. It's published in Child Development, I think it's 2006.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today and for being here. And thank you for all of our participants and attendees. We really appreciate your attendance at this event. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.